As I mentioned to you guys earlier, what I love to do is design. I love it in every part of my practice. I love it in my personal life as well. I just love designing. So a huge part of what makes hair fun is designing. And so we're going to talk a little about design. It's going to have some overlaps to what you've heard already. Now, of course, bad design just looks horrible. Now, this is the old type of techniques that you say, well, we don't practice that kind of medicine anymore, that kind of surgery. But to show you some fine points on the left, these are not plugs. This is not a ure flap on the left. But these grafts don't look right because they've been mangled. They look like pubic hair, I say, because they've been inserted either to a site that's too small or aggressively inserted. There's see-through, the angles are all poor, and this is one procedure correction I did. This is a gentleman here. What's wrong with him on the left? Looks like plugs. Those are actually not plugs. Those are standard grafts, but they're forehair grafts placed in the hairline. They're compressed, so the grafts are squeezed into a site that don't fit. And there's pitting, which means the grafts are placed too deep around the surrounding areas. The temple hair doesn't match. The hairline's too straight. The grafts are too large. The grafts are not angled correctly forward. And so there's so many issues that are there, and this is why I don't want you to think I'm just making holes, okay? And this is a one-stage correction. What is the major problem on the left? If you had to pick one of many things, but anyone shout out what's wrong with the hairline on the left?
Too flat.
Yeah, too straight, too flat, and one other thing? The biggest thing is that they look well, not biggest thing, one of many things. They look startled. This is the use of Vance's term. They're surprised, they're sitting straight up, the angles are poor, the grafts are way too large for the hairline, the hairline's way too straight, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't match the temples, they're see-through. Besides that, it's good. And this is a one procedure correction. So I bring you back to the basics. Please understand the Norwood. Don't just look at it in a book. Look at each other. Understand what Norwoods look like in nature so that you can replicate this. This will take you years to start to understand this. Understand, again, the subcomponents of the head. And if you don't understand this is the lingo, the language we use when we think about design. So understand the central forelock being a critical zone of density, which is right here behind the central hairline. That central area right behind the hairline imparts a very strong visual impact. If that's weak and you try to get hair everywhere equally, it won't look good. So even when you're looking at designing, you heard from a great lecture from Steve here about how to place in a certain area. Don't just equally place those grafts. You have to look at priority zones, and that's part of the design, not just angle and direction, not just hairline design. It's how to make sure that you use those grafts and leverage those grafts for maximal impact. And this is just the same slides I showed you earlier this morning, but it's always worth seeing it over and over again, is understand that there are different angles and directions on a scalp depending on where it is. Someone asked me earlier about different ethnicities, and this is pretty much the same for ethnicities. It is a little bit different for females, okay? So that's a talk I'll be giving tomorrow specifically about gender. And then understand there are no abrupt transitions. Hey, you heard this already. Now, the angles mean this direction, going this way, and direction means going up and down this way. So, sorry, I got it wrong. Angles are this way, and direction goes this way. So when we talk about angles, I'm talking about the relative angulation up and down. And that means, for example, here, relative angles, what you saw just a moment ago was direction. So this is a fancy graph just to show you angles and direction. So when I use the word angles, I talk about this, direction like this. And every one you place, every site you make has a different angle and direction. And you're controlling that design when you make it. And so you'll get that in lab today, and then anything you didn't quite get or need to repeat, tomorrow you have all day to repeat that as well. I'll repeat this again. This is the the head is like a box. And so when you think of the head like a box, you can begin to design a scalp that is natural. Again, you don't want to put hairs on the forehead because hairs don't exist on the forehead. Now, occasionally, there is hairs on the forehead. In rare cases, some people's hairlines go so low that's like this. Don't do that. If they need a transplant, you should not be making hairlines that low. There's all different types of ways to make sites, okay? You're going to hear parallel sagittal, you're going to hear lateral slit, which is also known as coronal. You can hear about micro punches. I would tell you to make it easy is probably do all your sites parallel or sagittal, because that's how the direction of the hair, you can follow your pattern really well. Don't get too fancy with these ideas, trying to get fancy and think, okay, I got to make it this way or this. I like Vance talks about this being a B category. It's not critical. What's more critical is you master angles and direction, and don't start mixing around doing all different ways. What I'm going to show you here is anyone do rhinoplasty in here? And if you look at rhinoplasty, you draw like the Gunter diagram. It tells you what graph you place and all that. This is my Gunter diagram. This is I record this in my electronic medical record of how I designed it. So when I go back and look at the patient, I can see what worked, didn't work, what could be better, etc. But you need to record things. And part of the reason of showing this is not to memorize this. It's for you to look at the complexity that's in my mind as I start to design. All right, and that's what makes it fun. It's not just little holes. So if you look at different patterns, this is a male pattern. You can see all the angles going, all the directions going forward. Okay, remember there's no splay across that. And then there's those little sentinel hairs going forward that make it look natural. If you say, what does that mean? Again, I'll show you that more in detail in a minute. These are just representative designs. You can see that all the directions go forward, but then they start to slowly sweep over right at the point where it goes down into the temporal region. The crown itself, you can see all these natural going in all different directions, but there's no abrupt transition points. This is a female hairline. You can see how they just sweep, and there's no abrupt transitions. Following as natural hairs, you can see that these hairs actually sort of almost go like a whirl in the frontal hairline, because I was following some of his natural pattern that I was doing. This is another temporal point going back, and again, I like to give the same warning 100 times. Don't be doing any kind of temporals unless it's maybe just the upper little portion, because you will not make them look natural. I promise you that when I watch you in lab, it's very hard for you to get consistent angle directions, and if you start doing this, you're going to have people walking around looking like this, unless they're trying to try out for the circus. But I hear that Barnum and Bailey is no longer in practice, so I think you should stop. Do not try to engage in this. This is just a sideburn reconstruction from someone that's had aggressive facelift removal. I don't even know if it's worth doing this. Steve's talk was so good, but this is just how I do it. After we have estimated the strip, we want to get a real life number on this. So I usually start with a very small portion of that projected number, like let's take 2 or 4 centimeters out. My staff dissect that number as I continue the rest of my harvest, and so by the time I'm done with my harvest and closure, they can give back to me a very accurate projected number of the grafts based on dissecting out about 4 centimeters. And so that's the way I estimate it. So I just do 4 times whatever the number that fits in there. Let's say it's 24 centimeters, 4 times 6, you get the total number of grafts. Of course, part of the artistry is to say, I don't need that many 1 hairs. Oh, I need to double up my 1 hairs to make 2 hair grafts, or I need more 1 hairs because the hairs are too thick for the hairline, so you may split some 2 hairs. So at least I get a number that I can have some artistic control to make some changes with. How I make recipient sites, simply needles. They're 18 gauge for 3 hairs, 19 gauge for 2 hairs, and 20 gauge for 1 hairs. But one caveat is your staff, when they're starting, may not be able to fit 1 hairs in the 20 gauge needles. And the problem is they're going to mangle those grafts, and the grafts will grow out poorly. So you want to have grafts that do fit. So I always test for depth. So I make a little stop check here so I have the right depth control. And so I put the graft next to the hair follicle to make sure the depth is right. Then I test it. I make sure it's not too tight. So this is, you're going to get a copy of all these, so don't worry about trying to record this. But these are just showing you what the equivalent sizes are and how one could use different types of blades or needles to make recipient sites for different size hairs. Again, you will get this in your mail, so don't rush to try to record this down. I mentioned earlier, I always test graft to site fit, and that means the depth and the width, that everything fits. If it doesn't fit, redo it. Now you say, well, when do you do that? Do you make 2,000 sites and then check? No, I make 3 sites. And then my staff checks what they're dissecting. Sometimes we'll say, okay, you need to go a little bit fatter on your grafts because they're not fitting, or I've got to make different sites. You got to test 1 or 2 sites before they've dissected 2,000 hairs and you've made 2,000 sites and nothing fits. So always start slowly. Don't get crazy fast. Vance has talked to you a lot about tumescence. I do a tumescence in the front as well. Some people don't believe in tumescence in the front. It's fine. I like to elevate that bed, and so that my sites minimize vascular injury. I put a little tumescence in the area I work, about maybe 10, 15 cc's. Then as I progress back, I add more tumescence as I go. I use a very dilute steroid solution. It's called a Basi, based after the Iranian doctor that came up with this, and it really reduces the postoperative edema. I get a very low incidence of edema, probably less than 10%, because of the solution. So it's, you ask me what is the specifics, you can go up, photocopy it from my book. I don't make any profits on my book. They all go to charity. Actually, the first 3 volumes go to stop international sex trafficking, and the last one goes to stop, to help research in cicatricial alopecia. So when I'm promoting this course, I take no honorary either. So anything I'm promoting, don't think it's because I'm trying to make a buck off you. But I do believe in obviously what I wrote. Position is important, and I'm going to really stress this, and I think the faculty has stressed this, is when the patient is supine, when you're trying to make those low angles, remember you don't want the high angles, a surprise star look. It's very hard to do that. If a picture of the person sitting up and you're trying to go in front of them, you can't do that. You want them lying flat like this, so that your hand naturally falls at a low angle. So that's going to be very, very helpful. Now, I like, personally, some people would disagree with this, and that's fine. I have a lecture on crown tomorrow to tell you why I like my angles up on the crown. Some people like it low, and it's fine. My personal take is I get better visual density. I can pack it more densely in the crown when the angles are up. And there's a lot of reasons, but we'll go through that tomorrow. But I like to have my patient upright for the crown. I'll also, and you'll hear this in my lecture tomorrow, is rotate the patient in different angles, different positions, to get how I can make those sites more easily. I'm just showing this as an overview. You're not going to learn everything in a matter of 20 minutes. So this is just a 2-second video of just showing me make sagittal sites. And again, don't get in love with either one. These are coronal. People just don't understand what coronal or lateral slit sites are, but they go this way versus this way. The blade or the needle goes in this direction is sagittal. You know what sagittal is, being physicians, and then coronal. So how do we do this? So I have a hairline that's drawn in the beginning. And then the goal is to take that straight hairline that defines position and irregularize it. Some people take that hairline and already make some irregularities in it, and that may be a very helpful thing for you to start, to not make a hairline too straight. Because if you just draw a very straight hairline and you start doing it as a starting physician, you'll probably make a hairline too straight. So some people go and actually use the marker to regularize it before they continue. I don't personally do that. But my goal is that every pass that I do, I'm focused on further irregularizing it. Now, I don't want it to look irregular where one side's different, but I start making those little 1-hair sites first. I start with 1-hair sites. Some people start with 2-hair sites and build it forward. I used to do that. I find that I want to control that 1-hair pattern as much as I can. So I constantly go back and further irregularize, making these sentinel hairs. Sentinel hairs are those little hairs that stick out by themselves and outcropping, to further finesse this. And I constantly finesse this. And in the thicker, straighter hair, darker hairs, for example, Asian hair on white scalp is probably the worst hair in terms of naturalness. I've got to really put multiple hairs and 1-hairs there to minimize the potential of looking grafty. So I constantly work and finesse this. Do I always make 3-4 rows of 1-hairs? I don't. Especially like, let's say, white hairs, fine white hairs. I barely need 1 hair. I could even do it without any row. But I put 1 row out there in the front, but it's so natural looking that I'm not so worried about it. You will start to acquire that knowledge of how many rows of 1-hairs you need to make something look natural. But what I encourage you to do is finesse this. In other words, love it, look at it, think about it. Is this too straight still? Can I make some little changes? Could this be better? Is this area looking too extended over here? All those little things. Take your time to build your hairline. Then I build my 2-hair sites behind that, and then I just continue to finesse those 2-hair sites, especially toward the frontal temporal recession. I don't like 3 hairs because they're too strong. So I like that blended out. I like this as a guard for my 3-hair grafts. And then I oftentimes, so that my staff know that there are 3 hairs, I make them with a lateral slit. I won't even tell you why, the benefits of one or the other. It's just too much information to digest at one point. But as I told you, I would make it all with sagittal sites. Actually, what I do now oftentimes is I'll just take a needle and just scratch my 2 hair to 3 hair transition so my staff know where my 3 hair sites are. Or a lot of times we'll dissect the 2 and 3 hairs into the same size, and then artistically my staff will place a little bit more of the 2s in the front and some more 3s in the back, and then scatter some 2s and 3s together. So there are many ways to do this. I'm just giving you some basic fundamental building blocks on this. And so this is just showing you in a real line, a little hairline zone. I've done some 1 hairs. I've built up a few more 1 hairs, constantly trying to regularize this line, built up some more 1 hairs. These are some 2 hairs, and then some 3 hair sites. So this is just showing this. And Vance has taught me a lot. He's my mentor. He's the one who encouraged me to go into this, and it's really given me incredible inspiration. So unfortunately, he's tortured by coming here every year. So he talks about a shoreline. I love this idea, which is when you look far away from a shoreline, it looks pretty straight. As you get closer and closer and closer to that shoreline, it progressively becomes more irregular. And so there's that delicate balance between you don't want a hairline that looks like this. You want a good form of a shape of a hairline. The reason you're doing hair restoration is because they've lost that line. So you want to restore that line. It looks like a line, it's a problem. And so you want to have that balance of as you go farther down into it, look more progressively regular. And it's going to be fun this afternoon when I work with you in lab, because I'm going to show you how, and I encourage you, Dan asked me, what are we going to do in terms of all this? And I said, look, I'm going to prep you for it. But what I want you guys to do is watch the faculty do it first before you start dancing around. You got to see it live 3D right then and there, how they're designing it, so that you can start learning from that. Ask them how they're holding their hands, how are they doing. Then we'll watch you. And then what's great is get your iPhones there. Don't take photos of the cadaver. Okay, that's not allowed. But take a photo of what I say, look, your recipient sites are too wide on here. Your left doesn't match your right. Your right, because when you start working a curved space, you'll go, wow, this is hard. Because your hands will start making sites differently on the left and right because it's a curved space. What I'll do when I start working with you, and I encourage my faculty to do this as well, we'll look and we'll say, your number 1 problem is your left and right sides don't match. And then, or even Socratic methods is great, and I encourage my faculty, take the design and ask the other students in your subgroup, what is the major problem here? And you'll start to learn from that. And I ask you to go through this, and if there's anything that you're not quite mastered tomorrow, please continue to work it, and repeat it. Take notes of what you're not good at and get better at it. You're going to make one major error. It's either your hairline's too straight, your recipient sites are too dense, not dense enough, the left and right sides don't match, your angle's not right. Something is not going to be right, and you're going to repeatedly make that same mistake. So as I work with you, I want to see you make those corrections, okay? I didn't even talk about this. Steve just did a mind-blowing job of talking about this. And Vance is going to do a mind-blowing job of talking about distribution, so there's no reason for me to talk about this. But it is priority is that hairline and that central forelock are critical zones. But I also mentioned earlier is if you make all that density way up here, front, solidly heavy, no hair loss, looks like a clump of hair up here and behind it being empty. So don't get so in love with the idea that you heard Sam said, hey, make it super dense up here because that's a critical zone. It's true, but it's got to balance and fade back to the posterior. If it's so front heavy, it's going to look weird. It won't work. And he said, well, give me the finesse points. That's the next lecture. So what I'm showing you with this again is not for you to memorize what I did. It is to show you how fun and creative this can be. I love making recipient sites. I love at the end of my recipient site to look at it. I know that's mentally sick, but I hope you catch this disease, okay? And this is and these patterns are only meant to tell you, hey, it's fun. I want you to have fun in lab this afternoon. And this is what I encourage you, is you have to master the technical, the left. You've got to get the building blocks of technically being great at this, but then you got to have fun and be artistic and think through this, okay? Thank you.